He stumbled onto the scene. It was an embarrassing presentation, maybe one of the most embarrassing moments I can remember at the Munich Security Conference from an American official.
What has JD Vance done? It is showing up all over my feed. American representatives are saying that they are so deeply offended on behalf of Europeans, that they're so sorry to all of Europe, basically. I guess whatever has happened, as a European, I'm going to be very offended by it. It sounds like a travesty. I'm going to take a look at the video in a minute, but yeah, I found out about this because Chrissy Houlihan just showed up on my feed saying, "I'm struggling for the words to describe my disappointment with Vice President Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference. I feel as though all of Europe and half of America deserve an apology. VP Vance chided and derided Europe for the very things that our great nation is wrestling with. He maligned the continent's leaders and voters when our own house is not in order. According to him, Europe is retreating away from free speech and is making wrong choices about who should be part of a free society. He maligned them for not leading with the right values and for persecuting those who disagree with them. He also spent time scoffing at the idea that Romania's election was possibly compromised, with not a whiff of a mention of the violence of January 6th or the attempt to annul our own election of 2020, and not a word about Ukraine or Russia. The hypocrisy is just more than I can take. I'm sorry, this does not reflect who we are and how much we value the European continent." Okay, then I saw that video that Jerry Connolly posted, and again, it just seems pretty catastrophic. So let's have a look at this video. Okay, so it's 19 minutes long, so I'm just gonna watch it and I'll show you the highlights.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we must live them.
I haven't been staying up to date with what's going on in Romania and Germany, but obviously, yeah, if elections are being cancelled or threatened being cancelled, then that's pretty alarming, undoubtedly. If that is what's going on, then I'm glad that he brought attention to it and that he's calling it out in a public forum where a lot of people are going to see it.
I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief.
Okay, now I'm offended. I'm really, really offended. No, I'm joking. So far, so good. I agree. It is messed up when people get punished, go to jail, etc., just because of something that they say. I think the part that's meant to offend Europe is probably coming a little bit later. So,
and perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own.
silently praying. What? Let me just double check what he said. Hang on. He was found guilty of praying. Wait, are people offended? So all of the people posting online about being offended, were they offended by what JD Vance said? Or were they offended by the fact that people have been being criminalized for their thoughts and for their speech? Surely they're offended by people being criminalized for their thoughts and their words. Yeah? They have to be. They'd be crazy to listen to this and be offended by JD Vance's words and not by the idea of people being criminalized for their words. The irony that they are criminalizing JD Vance for talking out against the criminalization of people talking.
He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law.
No. No. Did that happen? Okay, so basically Scotland has arrived into 1984. That's what I'm hearing there. I don't think most Europeans even know that this is going on, to be honest with you.
The government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. Censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. Under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer in the public square, agree or disagree.
Isn't that so refreshing to hear somebody say that? To hear someone in power say that we may not agree with each other, but we will fight to defend your right to say it. And I've heard before of some stories in the UK of people being arrested over hate speech online, including some elderly people who just seems like your regular old sweet English person that you'll see down in the pub. So yeah, that's really refreshing to hear him say that. We got applause.
Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with.
Obviously, you don't want to allow anybody who has bad intentions to start interfering by influencing elections with, mass advertising campaigns. And at the same time, I also understand that you also don't want your elections cancelled or your election results cancelled, because where does that leave you? You don't have a democracy anymore. You have to decide which one is more important, which one has more weight. It is frightening to think that election results could just be not accepted if people in government aren't happy with them.
The organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now, again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say. But when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them. And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens.
Wow. Thank you to him for saying that. That is awesome that he had the guts to say that. The entire Western world has been slowly eroded by particular ideologies over the last few years that have involved things that are reminiscent of communism. Yes, our free speech has been eroded. I didn't know to what extent. Some of these examples are crazy.
Nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration.
Yes.
Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course, it's gotten much higher since. And we know the situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across.
Made by politicians without discussing with citizens and without asking citizens to make a vote or anything. People weren't in on the decisions.
The world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. You don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. I have just felt that politicians in recent years, I mean, maybe they've always thought of people this way, but I genuinely feel like they think that people are stupid and they don't believe that people are smart enough to partake in the decisions that they make. World leaders are making decisions about the future of humanity, and they are not including us in it because they don't think that we deserve to have an opinion. I think they think we're stupid. They think we're too stupid to be involved in these discussions.
What no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. Embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little.
Wow. That's what Europe is supposed to be offended by. He told European leaders to listen to their people, to stop making decisions without consulting their people, to stop trying to censor free speech. And he explained why it's so important. And the amazing thing about the way that he explained it is that he told them why it was good for them as well as for us. Thank you so much, JD Vance. Thank you. When I look in the comments, there's people in England, there's people in Europe saying, thank you. This person says, I'm English, never been to America. I loved this speech. Thank you for calling out my country. This is brilliant. Thank you, Mr. Vance from the Netherlands. Thank you from Germany. Wow, what a speech. You guys are lucky to have someone like him. Brilliant speech. Thank you, JD Vance from the UK. Thank you from the Netherlands, JD Vance. He is calling out the hypocrites of Europe. Thank you from Germany. Thank you so much for your words and all the best from Austria. I haven't been so engaged with what a politician is saying for a long time. Well done from the UK. These people who were posting on X, this representative Chrissy Houlihan being so offended on behalf of Europe. What? What are these people on? Seriously. I'm amazed at how often politicians are so deeply, deeply offended on behalf of people who probably don't even care. Having watched that video now, her post was so overly dramatic. Chrissy Houlihan doesn't even have the words to describe how ashamed she is. This is the textbook definition of virtue signaling. I could literally put that next to virtue signaling in the dictionary as a perfect example of what that was. Thank you again to JD Vance. He didn't have to do this, but he did. And I'm grateful. As a European, I'm grateful. Let me know in the comments if you're in Europe or if you're outside of Europe and what do you think of all this. I'll see you guys next time.